The UK has suspended negotiations over a future trade deal with Israel, described Israel's 2.5-month-long total blockade on the Gaza Strip as cruel and indefensible. The European Union is reviewing its free trade agreement with Israel in response to the humanitarian situation in Gaza. EU foreign ministers will consider whether to suspend the deal over human rights violations. Let's speak to Alon Pinkas now, who's a columnist for the independent newspaper in the UK and a former Israeli diplomat. He joins us from Tel Aviv. A warm welcome to you, Alon. I want to ask you this, how the Israeli government, how Israeli people see this apparent sea change in opinion from some of Israel's allies in the West over what's happening in Gaza, with the likes of France, the UK and Canada now suddenly threatening sanctions and other punitive measures on Israel.
Well, the public blames the government blames the world, and so it's business as usual. But to be more serious, Neve, public opinion hasn't been measured on this. And what the public is hearing, if it bothers to even listen to what the UK is saying, the European Union is saying, the joint British-French-Canadian communique or statement, and even leaks of displeasure inside the White House. The public is brainwashed, for lack of a better word, by the government's, sanctimonious eye-rolling. The world is against us. Everyone is hypocritical. This is not true. We're the most moral country in the world, etc., which is what you expect from this government. And so, on the one hand, you have a public that still really doesn't know how to figure out and understand this, because while statements were harsh, David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary in the House of Commons, Prime Minister Keir Starmer, President Macron, and Kaja Kallas, the High Commissioner of the European Union, they were all harsh in their statements, but nothing practical happened outside of grave economic forecasts of what would happen if. That if didn't happen, and people, I think, viscerally understand that the key here is, as always, the U.S. Whether or not President Trump is going to exert pressure, or whether or not he's going to do, a kind of a Ukraine thing, say, okay, if these gentlemen want to bang their heads against the walls, and if they're not willing to cooperate. It's a plague on both their houses.
Let's focus on, Alon, let's focus on the what if then. What if the EU decides, after reviewing its economic ties with Israel, that it is going to significantly put financial pressure on Israel, that is one of its largest trading partners?
Well,
what would it do?
That would be huge, because the European Union as a bloc constitutes 34% of Israel's exports and almost 30% of imports. It is by far the largest, well, not by far, because the U.S. is a close second, but it's certainly the number one trade partner Israel has. Outside the European Union, but inside Europe, Britain is Israel's largest trade partner. So between British sanctions and the EU reviewing the association agreement, which for the benefit of our viewers is an agreement signed between Israel and the European Union as early as 1995, governing the economic and commercial relations between them. And that was the Article 2 from which you quoted earlier, that requires Israel to adhere to democratic principles and human rights, et cetera,
right,
as a stipulation, as a condition.
So you're saying
Alan,
the threat alone as it stands is not quite enough. We have to see action for it to force Israel to change its course. But I want to bring in Alan, let me bring in something before we move on, because this week Benjamin Netanyahu addressed the decision to send in this trickle of aid into Gaza, and he said the following, and we have this up on the screen here, Alan: "We must not reach a state of hunger, not for practical reasons and not for political ones. They simply won't support us, and we won't be able to complete the mission of victory." Alan, the comment seemed to suggest the decision to allow in some aid was made not out of compassion, but to simply keep the war going.
I'll go farther than that, Neve. It's moral depravity. If you occupy de facto most of Gaza, then you're in charge of humanitarian aid, whatever the justifications of the war, however the war was prosecuted, criticism aside, you're there, you own it. Israel resisted since late 23 and throughout 2024 any post-war Gaza, ideas to funnel in humanitarian aid and, in fact, remove Hamas and replace it. Israel rejected that, derided that, and went on. So it is Israel's duty to get this humanitarian aid inside Gaza. What you just quoted from Mr. Netanyahu just shows you, well, actually two things. One is that he is susceptible to pressure, even though this humanitarian aid is, to quote, I forgot who, I'm sorry, a drop in the ocean. I think it was the UN
Secretary General, yeah.
Tom Fletcher or the Secretary General himself. I'm sorry for not remembering this. It is a drop in the ocean. And if he's doing this just because a bunch of American senators who he thinks are his best friends in the world told him to do so, or because
Alan, before we've got to move on, but let me quickly, because you've circled back to the point that I wanted to reach, which is about American support. Is support from the Trump administration, as you've suggested, more ambiguous now to Israel, particularly after Trump's successful tour of the Gulf countries recently, where we know Gaza was discussed, and also the recent conclusion from the US State Department that Israel has, quote, probably broken international law? Can unequivocal support from the US be relied upon?
Many people in Israel think that not. That the answer is a no, that the U.S. may not be ambiguous, but is certainly behaving indifferently, meaning that there's a reason why President Trump sidelined or marginalized or demoted Israel, not just throughout his trip in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE, but also with his direct negotiations with Iran, and his decision to suspend military activities against the Houthis without mentioning Israel, and so on and so forth. I think that the greatest danger in terms of the American-Israeli relationship, which is basically what you're asking about, is that the president shows total disregard, aloofness, and disengagement. Not that he would pressure Israel necessarily, not that he would set conditions, but that he would say, you know, the hell with you. I'm going elsewhere. Other things to tend to.
Okay, so apathy is potentially more dangerous to Israel when it comes to America than anything else. Alon Pinkas, good to have you on Al Jazeera. Many thanks.
Thank you, Neve.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.